this passage invites us to be in the top 10% of everyone. That's my goal for the day, is by the time you walk out of the door here today, that you'll be in the top 10%. Everybody good with that? You guys want to be in the top 10%? Top 10% of everybody in the world. Now, see, like, top 10% is a big deal. If you think about college football, which I know we've got some college football fans out there. Anybody college football fans? A couple of college football. Go Dogs. Yes, yeah. One member of our staff answers every conversation just by saying "Roll Tide." So I don't know what that means, but apparently it means a whole lot of things. I didn't know that you could use it in so many different ways, but you can. There are 132 FBS football teams in the nation, 132, which means to be in the top 10 in the rankings puts you in the top 10 percentile, which is why all Tennessee fans are so excited right now. Like they're just both of them are really excited. That I mean, Tennessee is over the moon, and everybody else is like, yeah, well, we've been here for a while. Thanks for joining us. So top 10% is a big deal. Top 10 matters. If you were the top 10% of wage earners in the United States, you'd be making $173,000 a year, which hashtag goals, right? Top 10% is a big deal. That's a big number. If you were a marathoner, if you ran marathons just for fun, which is ridiculous, if you wanted to be in the top 10% of all people who run marathons in the male category, your top 10% time for running a marathon would be 3 hours and 16 minutes. Look, we live in Gwinnett County. I don't know that you can drive 26 miles in 3 hours and 16 minutes, right? Let alone, you might get there faster running if you could run that pace. Top 10% is a big deal. We want to be top 10% people. We want to be the kind of people who do the very best that we can, who live the very best way possible. And Jesus invites us into a way of living in our passage today that puts us in that top 10% of people in the world. I want to share it with you. It's probably a familiar story. You may have heard this before, but I want to share it with you this morning and kind of walk through it. It's in Luke chapter 17, starting in verse 11. It says this: "On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee." So Jesus is in this in-between region as he traveled. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. How many? 10. 10 lepers approached him, keeping their distance. And they called out to him, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." And when he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, how many? When he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet. He laid down at Jesus' feet and thanked him. He was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were there not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." What an amazing story. What a story that invites us to wonder what it means and what it could do in our lives to be in that top 10%. To be the 1 out of 10 that does the thing that changes our lives, that Jesus affirms, that Jesus celebrates. What would it look like? Well, let's walk through this passage a little bit together and kind of get the backstory, because Jesus is walking through this region. He's on his way to Jerusalem. You got to remember, he's headed in that direction because Jesus is going to give himself for each and every one of us there in Jerusalem. And he's in this in-between region, this liminal space between here and there. That's kind of where we encounter God most of the time, when we're wrestling between here and there. He comes across these 10 lepers outside of the village, and these 10 lepers are keeping their distance, the scripture tells us, as is accordance with the law. In this day, you could tell when somebody had leprosy, which was really any sort of skin disease. We're not totally sure that they were leprous in the way that we would understand leprosy now. They could have had any skin disease, but they were cast outside of the city. If you had a skin disease, you were put outside of the city. You couldn't live with people. You couldn't live near people. You could only stay with other people who had the same skin diseases, the same kind of leprosy. Leviticus chapter 13 gives really extensive rules about what it is that people with leprosy had to do. They had to wear torn clothes and let their hair grow and be all disheveled. Like that's in the scriptures, which is an interesting thing. This is the rule. Like you want to be able to identify a leper before you get close to them, because they were worried that if you got close to them, you would get the leprosy. So they made them dress in this way. They made them stay far off. And one of the rules is that they had to cover their face and yell, "Unclean, unclean," as people approached. They had to keep their distance. Can you imagine that's your life? Can you imagine these 10 lepers living together just outside of the village? The only community that they have is other people are sick, and every single day as somebody walks by, they're reminded of their sickness. They're reminded of their struggle. They're reminded of their hurt. They're reminded of their pain. Unclean, unclean. That's all they get to shout all day long. It's a difficult life. Difficult place to be, separated, outside, away from everyone else. They see Jesus coming by, and I guess word had spread. I don't know how they knew that Jesus was Jesus, but they see Jesus and they see, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." What a wonderful prayer. Anne Lamott, an amazing author, writes that she sometimes only prays 2 prayers in a day. Every morning she wakes up and says, "Lord, help me, help me, help me." And every night when she goes to bed, she prays, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." She said, if you just pray these 2 prayers, life would be a lot better. Lord, have mercy on us. Help us. Jesus. We're in a bad way, we're separated, we're hurting, we're struggling, and all we are is reminded every day of our brokenness and hurt and pain. Jesus says, y'all just go on and show yourselves to the priests. Y'all just go on. He doesn't touch them, he doesn't get close to them, he doesn't say, "Be healed." He says, y'all go on. And the 10 take off towards the village to see the priest so that they can be declared clean. Hopefully. I don't know. I mean, this in and of itself is a step of faith for them to stand up and go towards the priests. They had to believe that something had happened. They had to wonder if this man was unique and special and could do something in their lives for them to take off and to head in that direction. The story goes on that along the way, one of them noticed that he had been made clean. And he does an about face and comes back to Jesus and thanks Jesus, falls at his feet, praises God. And sometimes we read this story and we just think about that attitude of gratitude, which is important. Sometimes that's what we need to be reminded of, that saying thank you in and of itself is a rare occasion. In fact, a study recently done found that only about 12% of Americans thank other people for something given to them. Across the board, it's not a great statistic. In 2018, there was a study published by the Royal Society of Science where they examined everyday conversations between friends, families, and neighbors in countries around the world. And they said their focus was to identify when one person asked another for or to do something, and then they counted the number of times that the requester expressed gratitude. On average, the requester only responded with thanks about 5% of the time. Studies show that nearly 9 out of 10 people, when they heard thank you, wanted to hear thank you in their daily interactions. And unspoken understandings seem to not apply as a thank you. Clearly, people long to hear thank you. Researchers found that there was a direct link between gratitude and job satisfaction. That if you want to be a top 10% boss, it might be as simple as just saying thank you more often. The more thank yous become a part of a company's culture, the more likely employees are to enjoy their jobs. Researchers also found that grateful leaders motivate their employees to be more productive. We know that gratitude changes our brain chemistry and allows us to be more joyful, hopeful people. So if nothing else, let's hear that thank you matters. Saying thank you matters. That being a grateful person with a grateful heart makes a difference in our lives and the lives of those around us. But I think there's more here for us to wonder about than just whether or not we send thank you notes. Whether or not we're saying thank you day in and day out. This man comes back and falls at Jesus' feet, praising God and thanking him. I wonder what the other 9 were doing. You ever wondered about that? Like, what are they doing? So they go off, all of them go off, and one of them along the way kind of realizes that something is different, and he comes on back. But the other 9, what's going on in their heads? Maybe one of them thought, it's been a hard life. Like, God owes me this. Like, I'm entitled to something good happening at some point. So he just went on his way. I don't know, maybe one of them thought that it had just, like, he was feeling better anyway. And so his body just, did the natural thing that it does. And so he was just on his way. Maybe it was just his body just doing what his body does, fighting off the disease. Good job. Perhaps one of them thought to themselves, I just needed some encouragement to go. I felt like I could manifest this anyway. Like, I was just thinking positive thoughts, and it just worked out. Maybe one of them just didn't want to go back to Jesus because he had heard about Jesus' high demands for discipleship and didn't really want to do what might be asked of him. Maybe one of them got distracted on the way back and just forgot about it. He was so busy doing all the things that he had wanted to do that he didn't have time to go back and say thank you. Perhaps one of them just didn't want to talk about his past, just wanted to focus on his future. I don't want to talk about that. I just want to think about where we're going. Perhaps one of them didn't want to walk back next to a Samaritan after he had been made clean, because then he'd have to go back to the priest and be made clean again. Whatever the reason, 9 out of 10 take the blessing, but completely miss the blesser. They walk away healed, but they miss out on engaging with the one who does the healing. The man walks away, and it says on his way he saw that he had been made well. And most of us use this phrase sometimes. We say seeing is believing, right? Seeing is believing. Along the way he said, that's amazing. He goes back. The reality is that believing is also seeing. And when I say that, here's what I mean, is that as we begin to believe that the one who healed these lepers is the one who provides all good and perfect things in our lives, we begin to see those things everywhere. Seeing is believing, but believing is also seeing that God is who God says he is. In James chapter 1, verse 17, it says exactly that every good and perfect gift comes from above, coming down from the Father of light. gratitude isn't just about saying thankful. Gratitude is acknowledging where all of the goodness and grace in the world comes from. This one leper returns, seeing that he had been made well, but now believing that Jesus is who he says he is, now believing that Jesus is the one who gives us good and perfect things.